Hi, kindergartners. It's time for today's interactive read aloud, and today we're going to be reading another version of Stone Soup. This is the next book in text set 16, Sharing Stories, Folk Tales. This folk tale is going to be similar and different than the folk tale of Stone Soup that we read yesterday. Today's story is written and illustrated by Marcia Brown, but we know she didn't originally come up with this idea. But she changed some of the themes to make this her own. This book is a Caldecott honor book, and if you look close here and on your screen, you can see that it has a special award. In this book, we have soldiers who come to a town instead of travelers. Okay, so we're going to find out from the story who is clever and what the lesson is. And we are going to read and see what is so special about Stone Soup. Stone Soup. Stone Soup, an old tale, told in pictures by Marcia Brown. 3 soldiers trudged down a road in a strange country. They were on their way home from the wars. Besides being tired, they were hungry. In fact, they had eaten nothing for 2 days. "How I would like a good dinner tonight," said the first. "And a bed to sleep in," said the second. "But that's all impossible," said the third. "We must march on." On they marched. Suddenly ahead of them, they saw the lights of a village. "Maybe we'll find a bite to eat there," said the first. "And a loft to sleep in," said the second. "No harm in asking," said the third. Now the peasants of that place feared strangers. When they heard the 3 soldiers were coming down the road, they talked among themselves. Okay, so if they fear strangers, what does that mean? They're afraid of people they don't know. "Here come 3 soldiers. Soldiers are always hungry, but we have little enough for ourselves." And they hurried to hide their food. They pushed sacks of barley under the hay in the lofts. They lowered buckets of milk down the wells. So, boys and girls, do you think the villagers are going to be truthful to the soldiers about having food? They're hiding it. That definitely tells me that they are trying to trick them. So the loft is in their barn. That's why there's hay there. They spread old quilts over the carrot bins. They hid their cabbages and potatoes under the beds. They hung their meat in the cellars. They hid all they had to eat. Then they waited. The soldiers stopped first at the house of Paul and Francois. "Good evening to you," they said. "Could you spare a bit of food for 3 hungry soldiers?" "We have no food for ourselves these days." "We have no food for ourselves for 3 days," said Paul. Francois made a sad face. "It has been a poor harvest." The 3 soldiers went on to the house of Albert and Louise. "Could you spare a bit of food? And have you some corner where we could sleep for the night?" "Oh, no," said Albert. "We gave up all we could spare to soldiers who came before you." "Our beds are full," said Louise. Is that true, boys and girls? I don't think so. At Vincent and Marie's, the answer was the same. It had been a poor harvest, and all the grain must be kept for seed. So it went all through the village. Not a peasant had any food to give away. They all had good reasons. One family had used the grain for feed. Another had an old sick father to care for. All had too many mouths to fill. The villagers stood in the street and sighed. They looked as hungry as they could. The 3 soldiers talked together. Then the first soldier called out, "Good people!" The peasants drew near. "We are 3 hungry soldiers in a strange land. We have asked you for food, and you have no food. Well, then, we'll have to make stone soup." The peasants stared. Stone soup? That would be something to know about. "First, we'll need a large iron pot," the soldier said. The peasants brought the largest pot they could find. How else to cook enough? "That's none too large," said the soldiers, "but it will do. And now, water to fill it, and a fire to heat it." It took many buckets of water to fill the pot. A fire was built on the village square, and the pot was set to boil. So is this similar? This part right here, boys and girls, is this part similar or different than the stone soup book we read yesterday? Yeah, it is very similar. So they're starting the same with a big pot and some water and a fire. What do you think they're going to ask for next? And now, if you please, 3 round, smooth stones. Those were easy enough to find. The peasants' eyes grew round as they watched the soldiers drop the stones into the pot. "Any soup needs salt and pepper," said the soldiers as they began to stir. Children ran to fetch salt and pepper. Stones like these generally make good soup. But oh, if there were carrots, it would be much better. "Why, I think I have a carrot or two," said Francois, and off she ran. She came back with an apron full of carrots from the bin beneath the red quilt. "A good stone soup should have cabbage," said the soldiers as they sliced the carrots into the pot. "But no use asking for what you don't have." "I think I could find a cabbage somewhere," said Marie as she hurried home. Back she came with 3 cabbages from the cupboard under the bed. "If we only had a bit of beef and a few potatoes, this soup would be good enough for a rich man's table." The peasants thought that over. They remembered their potatoes and the sides of beef hanging in the cellars. They ran to fetch them. A rich man's soup, and all from a few stones. It seemed like magic. "Ah," sighed the soldiers as they stirred the beef and the potatoes, "if we only had a little barley and a cup of milk. This soup would be fit for a king himself." Indeed, he asked for just a soup when last he dined with us. The peasants looked at each other. The soldiers had entertained the king? Well, but no use asking for what you don't have, the soldiers sighed. The peasants brought their barley from their lofts. They brought their milk from the wells. The soldiers stirred the barley and milk into the steaming broth while the peasants stared. Boys and girls, do you think that the soldiers really had eaten dinner with the king? I'm not sure that was a true statement. At last the soup was ready. "All of you shall taste," the soldier said. "But first, a table must be set." Great tables were placed in the square, and all around were lighted torches. Such a soup! How good it smelled! Truly fit for a king. But then the peasants asked themselves, would not such a soup require bread and a roast and cider? Soon a banquet was spread, and everyone sat down to eat. Never had there been such a feast. Never had the peasants tasted such soup. And fancy, made from stones. They ate and drank and ate and drank, and after that they danced. They danced and sang far into the night. At last they were tired, when the soldiers asked, "Is there not a loft where we could sleep?" Let 3 such wise and splendid gentlemen sleep in a loft? Indeed, they must have the best beds in the village. So the first soldier slept in the priest's house. The second soldier slept in the baker's house, and the third soldier slept in the mayor's house. In the morning, the whole village gathered in the square to give them a send-off. "Many thanks for what you have taught us," the peasants said to the soldiers. "We shall never go hungry now that we know how to make soup from stones. Oh, it is all in knowing how, said the soldiers, and off they went down the road. Such men don't grow on every bush. So they were saying how unusual they are. All right, boys and girls, let's talk some more about this story. What was the soldier's trick? They keep listing ingredients and saying the soup would be better if they had just one more item. The peasants are amazed at what is happening in this story. Is this soup really made from stones? Why do you think it is called stone soup? The soldiers add stones to the pot first, and they are making the villagers think that the stones are making the soup. How do you think the peasants and soldiers felt about each other? The peasants, boys and girls, would be the villagers. So peasants are people in a village that are not very rich. They don't have a lot. So it was probably true at the beginning of the story when they said they didn't have very much to share. But I think they had enough to share with 3 soldiers. So the peasants think that the soldiers are very wise because they know how to make a special soup from stones. Do you think that the soldiers think that about the peasants? The soldiers probably think the peasants are selfish, and they probably think they're not very smart because they're able to trick them into bringing all their food from their hidden places to share with the soldiers and the village. How do you feel about the trick that the soldiers played on the peasants? Do you think that was nice? It definitely got the peasants to share their food, didn't it? What lesson do you think the peasants learned? When you combine what you have with what others have, you can make something special. It's very much like the lesson that the villagers learned in our story yesterday, that sharing is super important. So this story on the front cover is a Caldecott Honor Book. And this story was written many years ago in 1947, and it won an award for the illustrations. The illustrations in this story are very detailed, and they show how the people are feeling. And the illustrations, which are the drawings, show pictures of people up close and far away. They are pretty simple illustrations, though, aren't they? There's not a lot of color in the pictures. So I want you to stop and think about the story from yesterday and the story today. Yesterday's stone soup story was about 2 travelers who were asking the villagers if they had food. And today's story was about 3 soldiers who were traveling and coming home from a war and asking the people in the town, the peasants, if they had food. Which story did you like better? It's okay to like one better than the other. If you liked the first book we read, yesterday's story about the travelers, can you hold up the number 1? If you prefer today's version of Stone Soup, can you hold up the number 2? I think they're both pretty interesting stories with good lessons for us to learn and for us to realize how important sharing is.